Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Lincoln Journal-Star's Life in the Red podcast. Luke Mullin here, joined by a new face once again. This is Jordan McAlpine, Husker football writer, Husker sports writer, kind of do it all around here. Amy just out there in Minneapolis this week, heading up the Big Ten Media Days for men's and women's basketball. So look for all her coverage out there. But we got Jordan in. He knows a thing or two. Don't worry, not too green around the edges to talk about. Of course, all the stuff from the Rutgers win, team getting ready for Purdue, crazy stuff happening in the Big Ten right now. So a lot to talk about with this Husker football team. And let's just get right into it, that Rutgers game. Personally, I was looking to see the response from the team because you get that Indiana game. I mean, obviously it gave them a lot of momentum, big chance to keep it rolling. And first half, it didn't look so good. Obviously, shaky first half there for the Huskers. Down 13-0 at halftime, and a stat that really stood out to me, Rutgers, really bad passing offense, only throwing for 161.2 yards per game, exceeded that in the first half alone. I think it was like 180, 190 yards. So things that seemed to happen against Nebraska there, kept going, but huge play, Huskers down 7-0. I think this was kind of a point where if Rutgers got this, the game really would have flipped on the edge. That punt block, and Blaise Gunnarsson comes flying in from about 15 yards down the field, makes that tackle. How big was that?
Yeah, well, that big red curse that you talked about might have continued there with those teams taking advantage. But you go back to that play, Brian Buschini's hurt.
Yeah.
The block just goes away right away, and it's 14-0 at that point if they get in the end zone. That tackle by Gunnarsson, you know it and I know it. We both talked about it. That could have swung the game the opposite way real quick there. So big play, and from then on, obviously, took a little bit till the second half for Nebraska to really get the ball rolling, get some momentum there. But early on there, you go 2 scores down behind the 8 ball. It's not easy to climb your way out of that, especially the way Nebraska's suffered in those situations the last few years here.
Yeah, considering, yes, they turned it around a little bit there on offense in the second half, but it wasn't pretty, so it's like...
It was bleak early on, to say the least.
Yeah, if they went down 14-0 there, it really would have been a mountain to climb back. And the fact that it was 14-13 at the end, I think that's all the proof you need that play kind of changed the game right there. But
and especially with Blaise Gunnarsson as a way to get himself involved. I know that was a name early in camp. Mike Dawson, Barrett Ruud, Eric Chenander, Bill Bush, a lot of people on that defensive side of the ball talked about him as kind of, we've been waiting for him to hit that field on a regular basis, but also make those type of plays since he got recruited here. That those go a long way in making a difference in those games. So
yeah, you want to talk about a special teams guy who showed it there to get more playing time, Malcolm Hartzog. Big time. I think Bill Bush said he was their best gunner there. On the punt special teams. So he wants to get this guy on the field. Suddenly Hartzog, he's starting 2 weeks in a row. So a good note, that those guys, that time that you get, the few snaps on special teams, it does mean a lot to, produce that playing time down the stretch, most definitely. But the other big issues there in the first half, offensively, getting shut out was always going to be, kind of a question mark. But I think the way that it happened was really interesting. Casey Thompson, Casey Thompson just running for his life throughout that first half. After the game, he kind of admitted he was throwing passes before the wide receivers got out his breaks. There are a couple plays where really Nebraska's tackles were kind of blocking air. They just whiff on a good move from the pass rusher, don't quite get off their set quite quick enough. And that really you could tell that Thompson was really kind of shook from that in the first half.
Yeah, and especially from his standpoint, you just said it yourself, nonstop. Those Rutgers defenders were going through Nebraska's O-line like a knife through hot butter, it seemed like, for most of the night there.
Yeah.
No one stopping him, running for his life, that you're not getting those receivers open, your routes aren't connecting down the field with it, that you got to improvise, but at the same time, when you're getting slammed to the turf every other play, and we know Casey's been battling through those nagging injuries all year long, that it's kind of par for the course, but at the same time that when nothing's going for you, you can't put all that on one man's shoulders to make up for it. So
yeah, and Thompson in halftime, he was getting treatment. He was getting taped up. He said he wasn't even with the team, as Mickey Joseph or, all the position coaches are trying to make those adjustments at halftime. Casey's getting treatment. And I think, from the media perspective and from a fan perspective too, I'm thinking 13-0, offense hasn't shown much. If Rutgers could come out, and really score just one more touchdown, I mean, that was, in my eyes, that was going to steal the game away. And ultimately it would have done. But credit to Nebraska, because obviously they did turn it around there at a halftime. And such a big first drive, because we've seen all year the opening drive of the game really been where Nebraska succeeds. Second half hasn't really been the same level of execution, but this time they got it right, marched right down the field, and great play call right there on the goal line. Travis Vokalek wide open for first touchdown of his Husker career, which is kind of hard to believe, isn't it?
Well, especially with Vokalek, as much of a leader, as big of a part of that offense as he's been. I know he misses the 2 games earlier this year with his injury in Ireland, but for Nebraska's pass game to be effective, both from a blocking standpoint with Travis and simply from catching, you really got to get him going. And that touchdown there, from a confidence standpoint, for individual confidence standpoint, goes a long way, but also from whether it's Sean Beckton or that tight end room, that you get him involved, it's going to go a long way as an extra option along with Trey Palmer, Marcus Washington, and that wide receiver room. But also, you talk about that fast start. They've been good about it all year, but the last 4 or 5 years, Nebraska teams go into the locker room at the half coming out.
Yeah.
It's been a mixed bag of how you see them respond coming out. That the confidence they went down the field with, the way that they came out and responded right away, I think is even more of a telling sign of where this team has been the last few weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, hearing the coordinators today, Bill Bush and Mark Whipple, both of them said there was, no quit in that team at halftime. There was maybe more of a quiet confidence, obviously down 13-0. I don't think they were, hooting and hollering in that halftime locker room, but the fact that you can be down 2 scores like that and still be confident that you're going to go out there in the second half and win the game, I think that's something that the Huskers probably wouldn't have had in Game 2 or Game 3 of this season. So,
and it's 2 straight weeks they've done it too.
Yeah.
Both Indiana and Rutgers. I mean, box score wise, Indiana might look a little bit more different with the separation at the end there, but those are both dogfight 1-score games that Nebraska's been able to make a play, put that final stop together that you just said it yourself, week 2, week 3, I don't know if we're seeing that same result out in the field with it. So
definitely. And, as that second half marched on, I think it was pretty clear that the defense was doing a great job shutting down those drives. Obviously, Rutgers, they still had their chances to, even they had a field goal attempt there at the end of the first half. They had some missed opportunities for sure. And Nebraska missed some chances too. I look at those short yardage plays. The first one, try to run a Trey Palmer end around, which I do think, looking back at the play, there was room, probably a 15, 20-yard gain if he hits it in stride. But at the same time,
timing was off on that one,
But at the same time, I'm like, why run an end around with your wide receiver? You haven't run this play all game. Literally, I mean, just a quarterback sneak, excuse me, or straight handoff off the middle. I mean, that stuff, pretty high percentage when you only need 1 yard. And same thing happened later. Anthony Grant out of the game, so Jaquez Yant in for the short yardage. 3rd and 2, picks up 1 yard, and so Nebraska gets a good look. They want to throw the ball, motion Yant out wide, and the pass ends up going incomplete. Again, it leaves me wondering. 4th and 1. Yes, he only got 1 yard on the previous play. All you need is 1 yard. Just run that thing straight up away. But
Big Ten football.
Yep, I think it's all blasé now. The coaches are past it. They're ready to keep moving on because obviously Miles Farmer, the huge play, gets that interception, and then 1 play later, Thompson throws a strike to Palmer down the middle. 14-13 lead, and Huskers hang on the rest of the way to get that win. But overall takeaways from the game, we talked about the offensive line a little bit, but I was looking at those PFF grades after the case, and I think every single lineman was below the average in pass block, which is pretty incredible that they still won that game. But to me, it was just a totally missed chance for Rutgers. And I mean, like I said, credit Nebraska, credit the defense for what they did in the second half. But if Rutgers was in any way competent at all, they would have won this football game. And you got to look at the quarterback rotation there. Obviously, Vedral just came back from injury. I think noticeably he wasn't throwing the ball as well as he could be. But I just don't get the quarterback rotation there in the second half. Vedral in, Vedral out. You bring in the running quarterback. You bring in Evan Simon, who ends up throwing all 3 interceptions. I mean, What'd you kind of make of what Schiano was doing there?
Yeah, especially as we saw out of the gate, Vedral comes out on that first drive, the back-to-back passes he hits, the run, it's working. Obviously, that wasn't sustainable throughout the night for it. That it's kind of questionable going with that 2-quarterback set, bouncing between the two, how they did there. But if I'm on that sideline, I don't know if I'm letting that interception number get to 3 with Evan Simon out there and making that change back to Noah Vedral.
And I think that's why we saw Rutgers fire its offensive coordinator a couple of days later. I mean, you're up 13-0 at halftime. Like I said, a touchdown really would have, maybe not sealed that game away. Maybe it would have been a different response from Nebraska, but.
And from the Rutgers side, you almost wonder with Vedral, you stick him in for any of those drives for that matter, especially in the third quarter to kind of shift the momentum there. If he connects on something right out of the bat, how much of a jolt of confidence that gives into their offense with it. And instead you go out and throw another pick. So.
And I mean, definitely, he was struggling to throw the ball. But in my opinion, I mean, either he's your guy or he isn't. Like last week, they got him a few snaps, to kind of ease him in. He comes out, starts, plays the first 25 minutes, and then, he hardly plays a series the rest of the way. I have to think either, he really re-injured himself or something had to be going on there because it just doesn't make sense to me that's what they would do. And like I said, I mean, the chances, Nebraska gave them some chances to go down there and win it as well. Obviously, they got the ball back there with about a minute left. Could have been about 2:30 or 3 minutes, I think it was, without the personal foul.
Yeah, at the end too. That's another interesting facet of that game, to say the least. So
definitely, and it had people going, Mickey Joseph, never been a head coach before. Somehow he can manage the clock better than Schiano. So yeah, right. That was definitely a head scratching one. But I guess kind of the positive I saw there in the second half was the pass rush, the defensive line for Nebraska. Rutgers, I don't think they ran the ball to the best of their ability, which to me showed that the D-line was doing a lot better job plugging those gaps, not getting bullied off the line of scrimmage. But the pass rush in particular, because Rutgers, they had quite a few third downs, quite a few obvious passing situations, which is really where the pass rushers want to be in. Garrett Nelson gets going finally. He's had a few sacks, and Huskers as a whole only had 4 sacks those first 4 weeks, 3 in each of the last 2, season total up to 10. So really impressive there.
Yeah, and I know you said Nelson. I'll throw Ty Robinson into that mix too. 2 guys that they've really gotten going here. I know. I'm sure Garrett will be the first one to say it. Not the start to the year he wanted, both from a team and individual standpoint. He's really been a factor here these last 2 weeks, and hopefully you hope that springboards them into the rest of the season here to keep building on that.
Yeah. But on the other side of the field, Anthony Grant, a guy who had 100-yard days, 4 out of the first 5 games, didn't get it done against Oklahoma, partially because he only played half the game. Well, this week in particular, I think, was a real struggle for him, which offensive line definitely played a big part in that. The gaps just weren't there. A lot of the times, I mean, he was facing defenders at the line of scrimmage and then, putting his shoulder down for a 2 or 3 yard gain anyway, which is definitely Grant's strong suit. But 72 yards as a team, lowest of the season. A lot to improve in that run game, isn't there?
Yeah, and the going doesn't get any easier this week either, with a real run stout Purdue defense that they're going to be facing on top of it. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, let's get into that then. Huskers on the road here at Purdue. 6:30 kick there on Saturday night, which is going to be a big game there in West Lafayette for this Purdue team. In particular, given how wide open this Big Ten West is.
It's an understatement.
And we'll discuss that a little bit later. But obviously for Purdue, I think they know how big of a game this is to really launch, that second half of their season, coming off a bye recently. Aiden O'Connell getting the chance to get healthy. Of course, their superstar quarterback, the guy going into the year that everybody knew this team was going to win and lose games based off his arm. But I think they probably would have expected to have a little bit more contribution from the running game already.
Yeah, that's they're kind of twofold. That with their run game, it's been non-existent some of the time. I know last week at Maryland, 13 rushing yards, sacks eat into that, tackles for a loss. But at the end of the day, you can't win in the Big Ten. I mean, obviously they were able to overcome that, but sustainably you can't win in the Big Ten.
It's because Maryland didn't run the ball either.
And obviously. you hope Tyrone Tracy's back in that fold with it. They've had a pair of walk-on running backs that have been carrying most of the workload so far, but it's their lines had some revolving parts in there too, which is factored into that. But you look at Purdue's offense as a whole. It starts with O'Connell. The receiving game, they've been good through the air, especially, and 300 yards of offense. That when you're averaging that in passing alone, you're usually in good shape. So, and I'm sure we can talk about it more. The impact of Charlie Jones, especially, that instant chemistry. Aiden O'Connell, Charlie Jones, they were childhood friends, teammates. Iowa transfer, he played a big factor in getting Charlie to come to Purdue. That they've just hit the ground running right away with it.
Yeah, it's funny to me too, because obviously you have Rondale Moore, you have David Bell, you have these NFL guys, and finally they both graduate, and you're kind of like, okay, this Purdue offense will finally slow down a little bit. O'Connell will have to spread the ball around, and it's like, no, this guy's leading the NCAA in receptions. I mean, he's going crazy. Yeah. So he's having a fantastic year. In particular, I think that'll be a real test for this Nebraska secondary. We'll see if Quinton Newsome can go. He's been struggling a little bit with injury, left that Rutgers game with an injury. So Brandon Moore and Malcolm Hartzog, those were the top two corners for the rest of the game. And those guys stepped up, had some big-time performances, big-time interceptions. But Aiden O'Connell, I mean, he can sling it. And especially hearing Bill Busch talk a little bit more about the details of that Purdue offense today, what he said is, there's teams who run a lot of mesh routes, a lot of cross-in rub routes, verticals, whatever. The teams have this style of offense that they want to run, usually dictated on what their quarterback can do. He said, well, Purdue can do it all because O'Connell, he can throw to every inch of the field, hit every receiver in stride, do everything that they need to do. So they can be creative. Jeff Brom, great play caller too. So we expect a really tough test from this Purdue offense.
Yeah, and that playbook goes a big part of it with the creativity, the different little wrinkles that they can throw at you. But Nebraska's faced, whether it's Tommy Schuster, Dylan Gabriel's of the world, were a little bit different skill sets that they've brought into the table this year. I don't know if, obviously, they haven't faced a gunslinger in the essence of Aiden O'Connell that they're going to face this week. That, especially the Newsome situation, further complicates that what that backfield's going to look like. That they'll be tested definitely right off the bat, and whether it's Jones or someone else in that Penn State or Purdue receiving corps stepping up, you know it and I know it, they're going to try to take some early shots and really set the tone right off the bat with it.
Definitely, yeah. And defensively, I think is going to be an interesting one because we don't really know. I mean, what version of the Nebraska offense are we going to see? What version of the Purdue defense are we going to see? Because that Purdue team, I mean, Penn State threw the ball over them to open the year in week one. Last week, Talia Tagovailoa, he threw for over 300 yards as well, but Purdue kept him out of the end zone, stepping up, with those plays in the red zone when it mattered most. So Casey Thompson, I mean, I think he can definitely throw in that 300-yard range, but does Grant get going? Does Nebraska want him to throw that much? It's just really hard to say at this point because a lot of variables, I think, on that side of the field.
Well, and we just talked about Anthony Grant. Throw a couple of numbers at you here. Purdue hasn't allowed a 100-yard rusher all year. That obviously, we talked about that being the season low for Nebraska at Rutgers last week. If Purdue replicates that performance, we might be looking at a repeat of the of that. Obviously, they're giving up less than 3 yards a carry, and even staggering. Purdue is allowed just one run of 20 yards or more this year, and none in the Big Ten. That the ability to break off those long runs are few and far between against the Boilermaker defense. So
definitely, and I mean Grant, being that workhorse back too. Gabe Irvin struggling with a toe injury. That's why we saw Yant last week. Ramir Johnson reportedly injured last couple weeks. Haven't seen anything from him, on the field for that matter. And it's kind of at this point in the season now where you're like, start of the year, this running back rotation is as deep as it ever could be. And now you're at that point where Grant goes down. Grant goes down in your SOL. I mean, it'd be a crazy situation. So Huskers desperately hoping a big performance and a lot of health there for Grant.
Well, and especially we've seen too in those, you just talked about it a minute ago, those down and distance, short yardage situations. When they're throwing the ball, I don't know if that's a indictment on what there is there at that running back position, but you would think put the ball in the stomach and let the Yants of the world eat a yard or two. That that might be a real factor in this game Saturday night.
I think it's more indictment of the O-line than anything, but obviously all parts contribute. But let's get into a little bit of discussion here before we get to our hot topic and our score prediction there at the end. Like I said, we wanted to talk about this Big Ten West a little bit because it's quite surprising to me, that this Nebraska-Purdue game has a lot of implications about who's going to lead the Big Ten West. And the other game that has huge implications is Minnesota-Illinois. Now, keep in mind, this is no Wisconsin, this is no Iowa. None of these teams that have been successful, win that Big Ten West blueprint. They're down. All of a sudden, it's wide open. And so these two games this weekend are going to tell a lot because Purdue, they had the bye week. They won't have the chance to go 3-1. But Nebraska, Illinois, Minnesota, all three of those teams with a win could jump up to 3-1, be that division leader. For now, I'm going to remove Nebraska from this equation because I think they still have a lot to improve. But looking at those teams, Minnesota, Illinois, and Purdue, who stands out to you right now as that team to beat?
I just had to do a double take. It's October 12th, and we're talking about the Illini, Nebraska, and Minnesota.
Yeah, no kidding.
No, it's interesting. It's the wild, wild west in every sense of the imagination right now. But I do still think Minnesota's got to be that front runner. You look at a Tanner Morgan, but obviously the big question with that team, Mo Ibrahim.
Yeah.
It is a night and day different Gopher team when he's on the field for it. Can he stay healthy down the stretch here? If he can, I do think the Gophers are the front runner heading down the stretch here. If not, I think Brett Bielema's got something good cooking out there in Champaign, especially with the line play that they've had. Mm-hmm. You win a rock fight or stone fight, whatever the old adage is, in the 9-6 game against Iowa there, that if they can get it done that way the rest of the year, and obviously we'll see the Illini here in Lincoln in a couple weeks, that game could have real big implications going on. But it's I think those two, Purdue, a win this week would go a long way for them going down the stretch just to kind of get that ball rolling, like you just touched on, getting to that 3-1 going into late October. But I don't know. Their schedule sets up, but knowing Purdue, excuse me, over the last few years, I see a slip up somewhere along the way for Jeff Brom's bunch. So
definitely. And they slipped up already in that week 1 game against Penn State. Good clock management there at the end of the game, and they very well, I think, would be a top 25 national team leading the West instead of Illinois, who snuck in there as a top 25 team last week. But I do agree with you. I think Minnesota is the most well-rounded team offensively and defensively. Illinois, fantastic defense, but Tommy DeVito, to me, is not a guy who's built to win you a conference. The defense is going to win you your division and get you to that conference championship game. And similar thing to Purdue, live and die by Aiden O'Connell. That's going to win them more games than it doesn't. But at the same time, if he does have a game where he's completing half of his passes, throws a couple interceptions, that's just going to sink them. But I have a few stats here, that I've been looking at to determine these. And in particular, I'm looking at stop rate, which The Athletic puts out. It's one of their statistics for defenses. Determines how many, what percentage of their possessions, end in punt, turnover, no points. Like I said, a defensive stop. Number 1 in the entire country there, Minnesota, 85% stop rate, averaging 0.85 points per drive allowed. But on the other hand, up there at number 4, Illinois, 81.5% stop rate. And might I add, there are several other Big Ten teams in the top 10 here. Michigan at number 2, Penn State at 5, Iowa at 9, and Ohio State there at 10. So the Big Ten, the land of the defense this year. What's new, huh?
Land of the defense in the West Division.
Or land of the horrible offenses. Yeah. You decide what's going on there. But while we're on that defensive side of the ball, going back to Nebraska, these last 2 second halves have been really incredible to watch. This is a defense that was just getting gashed the first 4 weeks of the year. Run game, pass game, it was all bad. They had a bottom 5 defense nationally in the run game. I think total yardage was bottom 10. And last couple weeks, again, Indiana and Rutgers, not the greatest offenses, but a whole game essentially, with those second halves going scoreless. Do we think this is a sign of the changes that Mickey Joseph and Bill Bush making, taking charge and getting the ball rolling, or has it just kind of been fortunate game script and unfortunate opponents?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those things where You do have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt. The Indiana and Rutgers, it's not like we're talking Ohio State, Michigan back-to-back weeks, but at the same time, and we've heard Bill Busch talk about it, just kind of stripping it down, focusing on lining up. The other big thing that you didn't touch on there is the tackling has been much better the last few weeks. Especially the Oklahoma game was kind of the pinnacle of that we couldn't see an open field tackle to save their lives. That they're getting that cleaned up, getting lined up, but they're also playing with confidence. And you've seen that carry over from the last 2 weeks with it. Early on this season, if it's 3rd and short, I don't know if a lot of the guys on that defense are going into it thinking we're going to get a stop here. Now it's kind of the proof is in the pudding. They've done that and started to kind of prove to themselves that they can. And defense, team as a whole, I think that sense of belief is actually another big factor.
Yeah,
absolutely. Last 2 games here.
Yeah.
So this week will be the real test, especially the night game, O'Connell, all those factors that go into it. And if they do, I think this defense is looking pretty formidable going into the last few weeks here this season. But at the same time, I got to see a little bit more aside from the Indiana and Rutgers to really put too much stock into it. So.
Definitely. And I think for me, it was kind of a thing where those first 4 weeks, I mean, this defense had too much talent to be playing that bad. And I'm not going to say, that they're, a top half of the Big Ten defense. I don't think they're there yet or anything like that. But ultimately, what Busch has done is the last 2 weeks, they played a lot closer to their potential, a lot closer to their current ability, honestly, than what the first 4 weeks represented. So, like you said, we'll see Purdue. Are they closer to that first 4 weeks? Or are they closer to these last 2? Because that'll tell us a lot about the way the rest of the season's going to go.
And I do think there is part of that too. We see Hartzog these last 2 weeks, Tommy Hill earlier this season. You're going from Cam Taylor-Britt, Ben Stille, JoJo Doman, all that experience that you're losing from that defense. It was going to be a little bit of a learning curve and process to get some of these guys acclimated to it. Now, at the same time, I don't think any of us expected it to be either A, as long as it was, or B, as hard of a fall as it was to the basement of the Big Ten and pretty much every defensive stat. But now you're starting to see these guys emerge. Luke Reimer's taking another step. Nick Henrich is playing. If you can keep building off of it, it's a positive sign heading forward here. So.
Yeah, the other key one for me has been nickel. Obviously, JoJo, such a hugely important player last year, made a lot of turnovers, individual plays just based on his game knowledge, recognition of different schemes. And this year, they tried out Chris Kolarvik there. Isaac Gifford, kind of rotated those first 2 weeks. They moved Kolarvik back to inside linebacker. It's been Gifford's spot. Javin Wright getting a little bit of playing time there as well. But I thought Gifford has been fantastic the last 2 weeks, and that's made a big difference because the other thing in practice, they've changed up the way that those groups are coached. Travis Fisher used to coach the entire secondary and those nickels. Chenander, when he's defensive coordinator, he helped out as well. But right now, Fisher, he just coaches the cornerbacks, Bill Busch, working with the safeties and the nickels there. And I think that change has definitely paid dividends.
Yeah, and you talk about Gifford. I don't think it's a coincidence, too, whether it's you need someone in that position to be a leader out there and get that message across with lining the guys up. And like we've both talked about, that confidence to have someone step into that role and go out there knowing that they can get that job done. You've seen them playing that way, too. So
yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing worth touching on here, a little transfer news. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda officially entered the transfer portal yesterday. Last year, we would have seen a lot of mid-season portal additions. This year, it's like, oh, man, the portal's quiet. Well, that's because NCAA rule changes only can enter the portal there in May and at the end of the year there in December. But special, I guess, permission, I don't know what you would say. The portal magically opens for teams who've had their head coaches fired. You get a 30-day window to enter the portal, and that window's closed. No other Huskers in it besides Garcia Castaneda. Played in the first 4 games, then didn't suit up there against Indiana. Didn't travel to Rutgers, so kind of had a little indication that's what was going on. But I thought Mickey Joseph handled it very well. His comments there at the press conference on Tuesday, he said, just Isaiah wanted a bigger role in the team. Couldn't promise that. He said, it's your player's right, honestly, to seek out playing time, seek out that right situation. So he chooses to enter the portal, find another school, And kind of a shame because he did have that huge first game there against Northwestern, but a lot of competition at those wide receiver spots, and Alontae Brown ended up beating him out for playing time.
And especially with how the last few years have went 6-7 weeks into the season, and obviously the transfer portal rules are a big part of it, but it's kind of a nice breath of fresh air to be. We're mid-October, and this is the first time we're talking about transfer portal news for the year.
It's like, the players are actually staying on the team for the entire season.
Exodus is not in full swing, so.
Definitely. Well, like I said, I think Mickey Joseph, the changes he's made have kind of taken root a little bit, which brings us to this week's Husker Hot Topic. A lot of talk, I think, a couple weeks ago about the coaching search, who's going to be Nebraska's head coach. Well, the last couple of weeks have changed that narrative a lot. Mickey Joseph rising in a lot of people's estimations. So we'll pose the question this week, is Mickey Joseph the front runner for this head coaching job right now?
I'm going to throw the biggest cliche in all of sports at you right here, but the term buy-in. You see the way that these guys have bought into him the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
The different confidence, swagger, culture, however you're going to put it that they're playing under him. You can tell there is a difference. You see how Mickey's handling the press conferences, the media. It's kind of evolving in the last 3 weeks pretty well on the job, but deep down, and I think we both see eye to eye on this. I don't know if I'd go as far to say he's the front runner right now, just based off of where we are at this point of the season. And obviously, he doesn't have that full-time head coach experience. Now, granted, a month from now, if they keep winning, I might change my answer a little bit on that for it. But the way it works right now, it's been a great start to his audition. And if he keeps it going, I wouldn't rule it out. But like I said, right now, I'm still a little bit leery or cautious just based off those factors.
Mm-hmm. I do agree with you. I think he still has a lot left to show if he really wants to take that position full-time and run with it in the next couple of years, because there are a lot of great coaches out there, both from college, from NFL, lots of different coaches with experience, like you said. But I do give Mickey a ton of credit because this team, they needed someone to kind of light a fire under their ass, to be honest. They had the potential. They weren't playing to the fullest of it. The belief wasn't there. It's been a completely different team, in the last couple of weeks, like you said. But ultimately, he takes over 3 games into the year, and Nebraska's in a very bad spot there. 1-2, people already kind of, assuming that Oklahoma game was going to be a loss, and it was. So 1-3, those final 8 games, he kind of had the inclination that he might need to get them all the way to a bowl game, because that was, staring at that 1-3 record, you think bowl game is just so far out of the equation.
It's a pipe dream at that point.
People weren't even thinking about it. And so now, they win 2 games, and you're like 3-3. The next 2 games for Nebraska are winnable, as Scott Frost said many times, but didn't always translate on the field. They are winnable games, Purdue and Illinois, but they're tough games to win, which if you're going to be Nebraska's head coach, you got to win tough Big Ten games. Can't always just beat Rutgers, can't always just beat Indiana. So to me, next 2 weeks will tell a lot. I think if Nebraska does manage to win those 2, which is definitely a big if, they're 5-3. I think he still needs another win. Got to make that bowl, because 5-7, while it is a lot of progress, especially from last year's team that won 3 games, and the way that they compete down the stretch too, ultimately I think this team needs to be making bowls consistently. They need a head coach who can get that done, and that's what Trev's going to be looking for.
Yeah, and you just hit the nail on the head too with who they've done it against. Obviously exercise that caution. Now, by no means a discredit to Mickey with that head coaching experience. You've seen it. He has jolted this team. You hear the way players, other coaches talk about the way he's handled everything. I don't think it's a coincidence the way that they've came out playing the last couple of weeks, that it's a direct reflection of that. But, I mean, even this week, you see a Matt Rule name enter the potential list of candidates, and the amount of guys that are out there. I almost wonder that you don't want to run the risk of this being a one-hit wonder with him coming in for 7-8 games, turning it around, whereas you could go out and make that splash or go get somebody that you can, not just for 1 year, but really build a program. And obviously, the way that this place is the last couple of years, you need someone to come in and make those overhauls and really get it back on track. Yeah,
which is, that's what we heard from Trev, after the firing. He said it was always going to be a national search. Mickey, if he gets into that equation with the national search, obviously they'll consider him. But I do think the support from the athletic department for Mickey has meant a lot to this team too.
Yeah.
It's very clear, even if at the end of the year he isn't the head coach, even if, whatever, the rest of the season has in store, I think he's completely changed the way that this season has been perceived already. And a lot of that comes from the support he's had top down, and then the support that he shows the players as a result of that.
And I think for that fact alone, he has really put himself into that
Yeah.
conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Just you see the way, not just over a month at this point, how quickly not only the mood in that locker room and the guys on that team, but just kind of the perception, at least here in Nebraska, around this team that has changed, how big of a spark that he's made that it's obviously a couple more wins is really going to strengthen that resume.
Definitely.
But when you want someone to be that poster child, that leader, that face of the program, he's kind of checking off the boxes slowly but surely, 1 week at a time here. So.
That's a good way of putting it. It's kind of like he's got a few more boxes left to check, huh? And I have heard from certain people saying he's done enough. Maybe if he doesn't get it at Nebraska, are there other smaller schools who would look at him as a head coach? Which I definitely think is something to keep in mind there. That he's not only raised his profile here in Nebraska, he's raised it nationally too.
And I do think that is an interesting kind of part of the equation. You look at the recruiting value and impact that he brings here. Is if he's not the guy, can you get someone in that situation to work side by side with him and keep him on the staff if he's not going to end up being that head guy? But from Mickey's standpoint, you got to look at it as if you can go coach at one of those. I don't know if I'd say smaller schools, but so to speak, next tier down. Is that going to be more beneficial in the long run of you getting a Power 5 job?
Yeah.
Which it's a big if at this point, but it's a very realistic question around it. So
definitely, it will be very interesting to see. A, can Nebraska even keep Joseph? B, what role do they want to keep him in? And C, what the heck happens? So that's what everybody.
That's the question of the last 5 years.
Indeed, everybody will have their eyes on that. But for now, it's on to Purdue. Team is focused. I don't think they're paying too much stock into that conversation right now.
I don't think they're sitting over at Memorial Stadium listening to our podcast right now.
That's a real shame. But like I said, it's a big time game. I think we're expecting a great environment from Purdue there. Huge game for them, and obviously the implications for their season and for Nebraska to keep the ball rolling. Score predictions, I'll start us off. I had this game penciled as a loss before the year. Last 2 weeks have been great, but I don't feel strong enough to change that yet. I just think Aiden O'Connell is so strong a quarterback. This offense does a great job week in, week out of putting up points and doing what they need to do. So I'm going to say Purdue wins this one 35-24. I think the line, we usually bring up the line as just a general guideline of how the game is viewed nationally there in Vegas. Opening up at 13.5 points might have surprised some Nebraska fans, but again, remember this team struggled last week against the Rutgers defense. Purdue has a great offense. I think there's potential for this game to go a couple touchdowns in Purdue's favor, and the line reflects that.
Yeah, and I do think especially the O'Connell impact of it in that offense, that it's a broken record at this point, but we really don't know. Obviously, Nebraska has shown glimpses. They've done well these last 2 weeks, but how are they going to respond to that O'Connell? And for Husker fans looking for optimism, the road teams won 4 of the last 5 games in this series, that maybe there is a little bit of spark of hope or spark of life. But I think I'm going to side with my man Luke over here. I'm going 31-24 Purdue. So
yeah, I think Casey can win this game. Is kind of the simplest way to put it. If he can go toe-to-toe with O'Connell and, they both throw for, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, whatever it might be, he just needs to match the performance O'Connell has.
And I do think, too, I could see this game, the night game, the electricity, the atmosphere. I could see Purdue jumping up a couple scores early, just kind of right off the bat. But I do think fourth quarter, come crunch time, we're going to be looking at a similar situation of the past 2 weeks of that close game going down the stretch. Now, can this Nebraska team pull it off for a third straight week? That's yet to be seen, but at the same time, Purdue's no slouch, especially in the Big Ten West. If you can go head-to-head with them, even if you don't win for it, I do think that does bode well looking ahead at the Wisconsins, the Iowas on the schedule with how they're playing, that there might be a couple more wins left to be seen here over the next few months here. So
Absolutely. Yeah, this team, they've turned it around in the fourth quarter, done a lot better job. So we will see if they can keep it rolling there against Purdue. Like I said, 6:30 kick there in West Lafayette, night game. Amy, Justin, and I will be there. We'll have the coverage. So hope you all stay tuned. We really appreciate Jordan. Thanks for coming in. Hopefully we'll have you back. This isn't a one-time only. Get in and never come back. See you later.
I'm taking Amy's shoes.
Yeah, that's right. Amy's going to have to fight for her spot on this podcast back. But so yeah, thank you all for tuning in, checking in our Rutgers breakdown preview of Purdue. We'll see you there Saturday night. But thank you all for watching this episode of Life in the Red. For Jordan McAlpine, I've been Luke Mullin. Thanks for watching.